we're actually then defining, okay, what item do we need? And again, just like at the vendor level, we have the ability for that first pass to be very generic. A real common example that we see is someone in your organization may need a new tablet or laptop, but really they don't know any of the standards that the organization has set or what model the IT team has standardized on for the organization. So they may just select tablet or laptop, and then that can be filled in as the requisition follows through the process. These fields, all of these fields can be moved around on the screen. User-defined fields can be added very easily, or items can be removed from the field as well. So now when I'm logged in as William Kane, you can see that now I have a laptop request from Andy Hobbs that was just placed. And Andy is, William is an approver, and so William has the ability to have an approvals queue, and they can see everything in the process. One thing I wanted to do is maybe go back a window. So we also talked about the fact that Andy has some approval process as well. One thing that's really interesting to see is there's a status column. That status column then allows you to know where is that particular requisition, in this case, in the process. So you can see, for instance, that this transaction, the order for a Surface Pro 4, is actually now a purchase order, whereas the next one has been approved, but it hasn't been purchased yet. And then you can see also if I've entered a requisition but I haven't submitted it yet, then I can see that status as well. So this really ends up being very instrumental in allowing me to really have a good idea of what the status of all of my transactions are. So as an approver, what's going to happen is I can open any of those transactions that are in my approval queue, and I can bring them up onto the screen. And you can see here that this is a very simple screen that just tells me the status, what's being requested, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see then that I have the ability to, and this could be multiple items, so I can checkbox the items that are approved, and then I can click Review Completed, and that will then complete the approval process. So then at that point, you're going to notice that back on William Kane's approval queue and previously reviewed transactions, that $500 laptop order has been processed and is now a purchase order. Another option that you have that makes ReQlogic a great option if you work with certain vendors is the ability to do a function that's called punch out. And what punch out allows you to do is work with your key vendors and actually link out to their website so that people can make selections on that site. They can choose items that are valid items. They can see pricing for all of those items. And then they have the ability to bring those items right back into your requisition process. And then once approved, those requisitions can then be sent out as orders to the vendor. So in this case, I have CDW of one of my vendors that I work with, and as many of you may know, they're a technology organization. So I'm going to go to the next window, and now by clicking on that, I actually am going out to CDW's website. You can see that all these items are broken down by categories, and it's a typical website look and feel. I can narrow down what I'm choosing, and you can see here that I can select items and I can place those in my cart. So this feels like a normal, like a personal buying experience, but again, it links right back into your business workflow. So once I've selected the item that I want, I can check out. You can see here we have the option of checking out. And what's different then is rather than the system asking you for credit card information, payment information, it then allows you to transfer your shopping cart back into the workflow process. So then what you're going to see is now I have a requisition that has come in, and if we go back one screen or two screens, you can see that I've selected a Surface Pro. It's $1,260.03. Now, once I've put this and checked this out, it now shows up as a punch-out item with a description that comes from the website, and it's $1,260.03, just as we had said before. So now this is a valid request, and it'll drop right into the approval workflow. Now, once that has been done, then this can be turned into a purchase order once it's been approved. And I think the thing that I wanted to show you next is that the system is keeping full track of the process. So you can see from the time that the requisition was created, till it was submitted, till it was sent to routing, till it was routed for user approval, to who touched it, to ultimately then at the end, this can actually tie back to a particular PO number. So it really does allow you to really get a good look, and it builds in a level of control and accountability. So now you can see this is the purchase order that I can have visibility to, and this is the item with the PO details that I can see directly in ReQlogic. So to give you a little bit of comparison, Dynamics GP requisitions leverages Active Directory. It's included in your Dynamics GP licensing, which makes it a real advantage. What it can't do, for instance, is the punch-out functionality, which in many cases is not a big deal, but for others it becomes very important. So ReQlogic provides the punch-out functionality. It also allows you to do online receiving, which can be an advantage because it allows you to have a lower cost individual user to do the receiving process against purchase orders. It also does some things around RFQ, or request for quote capabilities. It can manage that. And I think one thing that becomes very important is it also allows you to do budget comparisons. So the nice thing here is if I'm issuing a requisition, then it can see the GL distribution for the line item that I'm requesting, and it can compare to budget and can send red flags in the case where I may be exceeding budget. So I'd like to take just a second, and do we have any questions right now in the queue?
We do. Is the vendor website limited, or can a purchaser buy anything through punch-out?
From what I understand with the punch-out agreement, it depends on the agreement you have with the vendor and then what they display on that site. So my understanding is that it can be a limited product offering for your organization.
All right, that's all we have right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is vendor onboarding. So with the release of Dynamics GP, I think it was 2015, I don't remember for sure, they added, I think it's 2015, they added the ability to do a workflow to approve vendors as they're added to your system. And so ultimately then what this allows us to do is have better control of who the business partners we are, and it's not as free form. So I can't enter a transaction against a vendor unless they've gone through this onboarding process. So to show you a little bit, and I will tell you as we go through this process, you're going to see a lot of similarities in the way workflow is set up, because I'm going to show you several different options. But so what we're looking at here is the workflow functionality built into GP for vendor approvals, and you can define what the flow is. So the first thing you do is you set up the workflow and you assign a person that is responsible for that particular workflow. Then you define the steps of the workflow. So I made this really simple. I just have to a W-9 that has to be seen, and then I have vendor approval. And so there's some settings that you can make in the workflow. For instance, do you send notifications when actions are completed? Do you allow approvers to delegate tasks? So if you're out of the office or something like that, do you allow them to delegate? Can the originator be an approver? And so that's certainly something that you may want to put controls on. And does this process even really require an approver? So what you can see is when I'm actually setting up the steps in the workflow, I can make these either a task or, as you'll see in a little bit, an approval. And then you can set certain guidelines for which those are set, and I'll show you those later on. Couple things to take note of down here at the bottom is you actually have the ability to send email messages to the approver, and those individuals can get an email notification when they have workflow steps that need to be approved. The other thing you can do is you can include a document attachment, which means that if, for instance, this vendor had completed their W-9, then that could actually be attached to the email that then goes to the approver. So then the last step is then the approval process. So you can see this drop down is of approval. You can also say the order for which these steps go. So in this case, this step follows the W-9 step. And again, another option in regards to messaging and including document attachments. So ultimately, where this is going to start, to see how it changes maybe what you do today in GP, is it will actually, now when you're entering payables, you're going to have a couple new buttons across the top. You're going to have a submit button and a view history button all under a title called workflow. You're going to have a gray bar across the screen, and it will show you the status of the individual vendor approval process. So now I do want to make sure that you know that you don't have to activate the workflow. So this is just something that can help you control your vendor activity. So in this example, what I've done is I've filled out the screen for this new vendor, and then I click on the submit button, and when I do that, it comes up with a comment window that will allow me to say, hey, we've gotten this name from several reliable sources, et cetera, and then you can submit this for approval. So if I then go to the next screen here, what you're going to see is you're going to see the first step was to attach the W-9, and you can see, so this has started the process. And it's saying, hey, we're waiting on this particular user to approve this vendor. Now, what we can also see is that this user then I set up a test one, GP test demo, they get an email and it says, hey, look, we've sent this task of attaching the W-9, and you can complete that task or you can delegate it. And so by completing the task, then it will move the workflow along. So then you can, let me go back one window. So I can click on these hyperlinks. If I click task complete, it will then bring this up, and I can then click task complete. I can put in comments, and then you'll notice that it has then changed the status of the workflow one more time. So now the vendor approval is waiting on Jeff Smith to approve it. So we did the first step, which was completing the W-9. Now we're doing the second step, which is then approving the vendor. So now I get in this case, I get a step or an email that says this has been assigned to me. Now notice, because this is an approval, it's not a task, I get different choices. I can approve, I can reject, or I can delegate. And so I'm going to have the same ability to click on any of these, and then I'm going to, because I approve it, then I can put in comments and click approve. And now, at this point, and not until now, this vendor has been approved and can be used to enter, requisitions, purchase orders, or payables transactions. The other thing that's important to know about this process is that the system will keep complete, just like ReQlogic I showed you earlier, will keep a complete audit trail of what steps this process went through to get to that approval. And that'll be true for every workflow that I show you in GP. All right, so Lindsay, I'm going to stop one more time as we move to the next step. Any questions on vendor approvals?
Yes, there's a couple. The first one is, does the vendor onboarding include an OIG exclusion search? If not, can you attach more than one document attachment to include both W-9 and OIG search?
You can do as many attachments as you need. It doesn't have the OIG option though, so it's all about document attachments.
Okay, and then the next one is, does the vendor workflow push the vendor to all companies?
The workflow needs to be set up in each company. So the process would act, if you're multi-company, this would have to happen in each company.
Okay, and then the last one is, can you show us how to actually attach the W-9 to the vendor file?
Well, I'm going to show you attaching an invoice in a little bit, and it will be the same process. So because I'm doing these through slide presentation, I have an example later where I can show you how to attach.
Okay, that's all at this time.
Okay, thanks. All right, so the next thing we're going to cover is purchase order approvals. So different companies have different philosophies on where the approval process should happen. It's very common for people to do invoice approval after the fact. It's very common for people to do requisition approval. And we also have clients that will just, when they enter a PO, they'll want that to be approved. And that functionality does exist in GP, and I'm just going to walk through it real quickly. So again, these screens should start to look familiar. What you're going to notice here is under purchase order approval, I can set up a workflow. And so the first step is assigning an owner to the workflow. The second step, which should be very familiar, is setting up all of the options. And then also notice that you're assigning the task to the individuals. Now, this is a very simple one. It's like a one-step. But you may have a far more advanced option. So I can give you an example. We have a client that would do, and this can apply to requisitions too. They may say that if a purchase order is entered and it's less than $500, then just send it through. If it's between $500 and $5,000, then send it to X. And if it's over $5,000, send it to X, but it also has to go to Y to get final approved. So you can define the conditions for this particular process. So then you can see here we have the same functionality at the bottom. We can send an approval workflow, and you can attach documents. So again, if there are different items that need to be attached to the process so that the approver knows exactly what we're getting into, then you certainly have the ability to do that. Now, this is where you set the guidelines. You'll notice up here that there's this option called Select a Field, and you can actually have multiple criteria in this process. So, but in my case, I just say where the purchase order work subtotal is greater than $1,000. And then you're going to notice then PO approval, in this case, is $598. It's pending approval. And this is the email. And this is the next thing I wanted to show you, is down here at the bottom, you can customize the email to include additional fields. And I'm going to show you this again when we get to a payables invoice approval. But the idea here is that you can put in pertinent information. So not only can you do attachments, but you can also put in pertinent information at the bottom of the individual email so that this user knows everything they need to know to make a decision. The other thing I wanted to make mention of is for people to enter requisitions, they need to have what's called a self-service license, which allows them to log into a very limited version of GP, and it's a very inexpensive license. It's like $60. to do purchase order approval, you actually have to be in the PO screen, so you have to be a full GP user to do this. So there are going to be different levels, and sometimes that can get confusing. So we want to make sure if this kind of thing is interesting to you, you need to know exactly, you'll need to tell us who all is involved. We'll need to be able to tell you how we can define it so that we can make it a great investment for you. So ultimately then, once that PO has been approved through the email, it doesn't. If you're an email approver, you do not even have to have a license at all. So to enter a requisition, I have to have a GP self-service license. To approve that through email, I have to have no license. To do a PO, I have to have a full license of GP, but to do approval through email, I don't have to have a license at all. So the only way you would need those licenses is if you need to go into GP and do other work. So while we're talking about purchase orders, there are different types of POs. And so there are standard, there are drop ship, and there are blanket. So a standard PO is your typical PO. You enter into the system, you send it to a vendor, they send a product to you. The drop ship option allows you to drop ship the items back to the customer. So if you're ordering an item that the customer is buying from you, you don't have it in stock, but you want to send it directly to the customer, you can set up drop ship POs. One that I'm going to show you a couple examples on is also called a blanket PO. And so we'll kind of go through that in just a moment. And then lastly, there is also what's called a purchase order generator that we'll talk about for just a minute. So I'm going to go through the PO stuff, and then we'll stop for another set of questions. So when I'm entering a blanket PO, the PO type can be blanket, drop ship, or it can be standard. In this case, I've selected a blanket purchase order. The system assigns the PO number. You assign the vendor, just like always. You select your item, the quantity of that item, and where it gets different is then, because it's a blanket, there's extra things that you can do. So in this example, I'm going to say I'm ordering 1,000 of that particular item, but then you can define multiple shipments. So in my case, I said I want 250 of them on April 30th, I want 250 of them on May 30th, and I want 500 of them on 6/30. So basically then those POs, in essence, it becomes a multi-line PO. So to show you that a little bit more detail, then this is ultimately, when you create a blanket PO, this is what it ultimately ends up looking like. And the other option, I'm going to go back a screen or two here, is it can be based on a value. So if you have like a service contract where people come in and clean your office and it's $500 a month as an example, then you can set a value option here, and it could be $1,000 or $500 a month or something like that. And so that example would look something like this, where you're selecting value, the extended cost is this, and then there's 3 payments, etc. So then here you can come in and define the dates and the cost, and those can be broken down however you see fit. So that's more of an example of a service blanket PO. In regards to the purchase order generator functionality, what I wanted to talk about here is if you maintain inventory, then you have the ability for the system to actually drive your purchasing behavior based upon minimums and maximums that you can assign to the individual items. So I can come in once a week and I can generate suggested POs based upon min and max levels. It can then give me a list of POs, and then I can make determinations on whether I make that buy or not. So this is a good function, but I don't want to oversell it, because what it doesn't take into consideration is the time component. So what if it takes me 6 weeks to buy it? If I'm below minimum and it takes me 6 weeks to buy it, I may be in trouble. So there are other ways of approaching that if time component becomes more of an issue for you as well. But from a simple perspective, this does allow you to have the system keep track of your minimums and maximums and make sure that you have plenty of inventory in stock to meet your needs. So in this example, where I go in and here are my suggested purchase orders, and you can see that it'll tell me how many to order and what the cost is, and then I can generate POs from right there. So when I generate purchase orders, it will create POs for those two vendors, for actually that one vendor for those two items. Okay, so I've just whipped quickly through purchase orders. Does Lindsay, do you have any questions on purchase orders?
Yes, there's one. What do we have as backup for audit when creating purchase orders?
I'm not, what do we have as backup?
Yes, for audit when creating purchase orders.
I guess I would, if the person asking the question could elaborate a little bit more, then I'll try to address that. I'm not sure I understand what exactly they need. Maybe give me an example of what they're looking for.
All right, I'll wait and see, and we can always address it at the end.
Okay, very good. So the last step about purchase orders is receiving. And so what we have here is, and I'm going to show you this through ReQlogic, you have the ability to do PO receiving directly into GP, the purchase order module, through receiving transaction entry. But ReQlogic also has the ability to do receiving. So if you're using ReQlogic for requisitions as an example, or if you're using it for invoice approval as an example, it also has a value proposition in regards to receiving, because then people who are not GP users can actually use the system to receive product. So in this example, you can see that we're receiving that Microsoft Surface that we had ordered via the punch-out functionality, but the individual user, with ReQlogic, there's a product cost and then there's a user cost, and the user cost of the users in ReQlogic is far less than adding a new GP user. So depending on your circumstances, that could be a really great approach. Ultimately, when I receive in ReQlogic, it's going to load the information right here into this window, which would be what the screen would look like if I were doing receiving in GP. So you can see here is my punch-out item against PO 2137 for 1260.03. So it all ties back from that requisition to that purchase order to receiving the goods. So mainly what I want to talk about here is that, GP receiving uses a full GP license. ReQlogic, if you're using it anyway, uses a much lower cost ReQlogic user license. So Lindsay, I'll come back, and have you gotten any elaboration on that?
The only new thing I have is, does the purchase manager still have to sign the purchase orders?
If you're talking about a real signature, you can actually, when you print, if you're printing your purchase orders, or even if you're emailing your purchase orders, you do have the ability to put an electronic signature on POs if a signature is required.
Okay, and then auditors always want to see backup for approval. What do we need to have when we print the purchase orders?
Oh, okay, so you're talking about approval backup. Then the answer is, on both of these systems, there are reports that will document the approval process for each and every one of the workflows that you're using. So as an example, if I issue a PO, it goes through a workflow process. There will be a report that will show you, plus you can do inquiries in GP that will show you that purchase order and the workflow steps that you went through. Now, ReQlogic even goes a little further on some of its workflow, because when it does its approval process, it then attaches in a note, attaches its workflow process right into a note on the transaction that got approved. So in the case of a requisition, the requisition workflow actually will be a note on the purchase order. Hopefully that answers that. And thanks for clarification. I'm sorry I didn't understand that on the first pass.
All right, I think we're going to continue.
Okay, thank you. So the next step is vendor invoices. And again, we have the ability to do this in either place. This is an example. This is where you receive an invoice and then you send it out for approval before you pay the invoice. And so we have functionality in GP that was added in GP 2016 that allows you to do invoice workflow, plus ReQlogic also does invoice workflow. So I'm going to show you the functionality inside of GP. So this should start to look very familiar, but I think I have a good use case here for you to see. What this allows us to do in this example is it allows us to set rules. And these rules can be, depending on what department, for instance, that this invoice is for, I route it to a different person. So as you look at this window, what you're going to notice is that, again, you have to set up an owner as part of the actual workflow process. You then define all of your options, just like we have before. Do I send notifications, et cetera, et cetera. But notice here now we have a set of rules. So if I click one more screen, what you're going to see is then I say, okay, here, this is an example of a small school that we were working with where they wanted to, it's a college, and when an invoice came in, they wanted the payables team to be able to enter the invoice and then route it for approval using the logic in the workflow. So in this example, I just set up a real simple example of business, science, and English. These are the three colleges within the university. So what I define here then is and I was creative. I used a field called the shipping method. When it says business, then I'm going to ship that to a particular direction to this user here. And it's called GP Test Demo. I'm going to send a message, and I'm going to include a document attachment. So this is where I'm going to start to get into document attachment as well. So then I have a different set of rules for the science group, and you can see that goes to a different user. And then I have a different one for the English group. So each one of those is going to a different user for approval. Ultimately, what we have the ability to do is we have the ability to set up the messaging that goes into the email, and this is true for all the workflows that I've shown you in GP so far. So this just kind of puts in the basic verbiage that you want to show so that it will get the proper information to the people who need to know it. So what you can see here is you have been assigned a task in the payables transaction approval workflow. Your task deadline is X, et cetera, et cetera. We also then have the ability to pick what details go into that individual email as well. So in this case, because it's an invoice, I want the vendor ID, I want the document date, the number, the voucher number, the amount, the type, etc. So all of that information then goes into the email content so that the reviewer or the approver actually has everything that they need. So what you can see here is now what your payables window will look like. And notice it can also have a workflow band, just like we saw on the purchase order window and just like we saw on the vendor approval window. So notice here you have the ability to attach documents, and if you attach a document here, when you submit the invoice, that attachment will follow the transaction. And there can be multiple attachments that are attached. So if you follow me here, I have an invoice for $10,190. for advanced office systems. This is where I click on the paperclip, and you can see that I can attach as many documents as I want. In my simple example, I just set up an Excel sheet to act like an invoice because I didn't have an invoice to attach. And you can see that's what it looks like. So that Excel sheet will follow that transaction so that the reviewer has the ability to look at that, open it up, and then make a better decision because they have the information they need. So then when you click on the submit button, then you can send along, just like we saw before, you can send along any information that might help put this in perspective for the approver. Now, so what you saw there is we have the ability to basically set it up, and the workflow setup is pretty consistent throughout GP. Set it up so that within GP you can either scan an item or you can attach an item and you can send it along through the process. I don't want you to think that this process is a document management system, and it's not. So ReQlogic has some additional functionality that, for instance, has what's called OCR, or optical character recognition, where you can scan a document and it can actually read. You can teach it how to read individual vendors' invoices, so it pulls the data in without you having to key it in. So in my example in GP, I'm keying in the data. Even if I'm attaching the invoice, I'm still keying in the data to make sure that it goes along. And for many people, that is very sufficient for what we're trying to accomplish. So the Dynamics GP invoice workflow, it leverages your Active Directory, which is more of your infrastructure. It's included in your GP licensing. It does provide the document attachment functionality, but it does require a full Dynamics GP user license. So the ReQlogic solution provides a more flexible routing policy, but it may be more than you need. So that's a decision that we could talk to you together and make a good decision in regards to what tool makes most sense. It does include document attachment, and now actually includes that optical character recognition. The other thing that I really like about the ReQlogic tool, and it's just like with requisitions, it provides you some budget comparison. And if you already have ReQlogic, it actually requires less costly user licenses. Okay, so Lindsay, I'm going to stop one more time. Any questions?
Yes. If I were to use workflow, could I have it send reminders to update information initially captured at vendor setup? For instance, insurance certificate that needs to be renewed.
This workflow in GP is really meant to follow a business document. So it's really not a reminder other than the notes that you can send along with it, with that document, for instance, your invoice, your PO, or your requisition. If you're wanting to send reminders based upon data in GP, there may be other ways to do it. This workflow is probably not the way, if I understand your question properly. And we can have a one-off discussion on that too, just to make sure we're on the right track. Any others?
Nope, that's it for now.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. All right, so the last things that I wanted to finish up with, and I think I'm going to get us out on time, is reporting. If you're using GP today, there's plenty of reporting options that are built right into GP. Anything from the GP report writer to Smart List, etc. And so our obligation to you as a partner is to show you what other options are out there in case they're interesting to you. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about a couple other reporting tools that some of our clients have really gained value from. So the first one I wanted to show you is what's called SmartView, and this is an ISV or third-party product from a company called E1, and it really acts as an enhanced smart list tool. So there are a couple advantages that SmartView brings to the table. Number one, SmartView can be run inside of GP as a replacement of SmartList, but it can also be a standalone outside of GP tool as well. So in other words, think about the idea of doing SmartLists without being in GP. So it doesn't require a GP user license. So that's really one of the big advantages that it brings to the table. Number two, it automatically creates subtotals when you do your reports. So you can see here that I did a report that shows me POs by vendor, PO status by vendor. So what we have here is the ability to also create a hierarchy or a query capability. So in this case, I'm saying first give me POs by status, so you can see released, and then I can see all the vendors and those POs that apply to it. And so just really very flexible in that regard. The other thing is you can add fields to your smart list simply by checking boxes on the fields that you want. So you don't have to click on a button, go into another list. It's all right here in front of you. So, and again, what you're looking at right now is actually running outside of GP. So it's not inside of GP, but outside of GP, although you can run it in GP as well. Here's another example where we're doing vendor by document status. And so what you can see here is Ace Travel in my demo company. You can see the PO. You can see the line status. You can see the PO type, the item, etc. So these can all be customized just for you. And I always find that my purchasing and my sales data, the line item detail becomes very important. And so this is just an easy way to allow you to slice and dice your data using smart lists that you're probably already comfortable with. The last advantage that this brings to the table is it's faster. So, and it doesn't scan all your GP data the way the smart list does, so therefore it doesn't bog down your other users. So the other tool that I wanted to make sure you were aware of is what we call Power BI. And Power BI is a tool that's gaining really great recognition, and it's a very affordable tool. So it is a cloud-based tool, and that doesn't preclude you from having your GP on-premise. So we can use GP in our location and use this tool via the cloud, or there is a desktop version, and it can create graphic dashboards that are very interactive. So one of the things that makes this really nice is all the different types of graphic presentation you can have. So you can see here I have a map based upon purchasing where my vendors and where in the world and where how much is coming from each one, average days to deliver, late deliveries by vendors, some things that you know a little bit more difficult to get out of GP. And then also, when you're working in Power BI, you can simply click on a vendor, you can click on a month, click on a year, and you can interact directly with the dashboards to get the information the way you want to see it. Here's some more information that average days by shipping type, etc., count of late deliveries by vendor. Here's some other purchase order data. You know, so whatever the information is that you need, this can surface it in a dashboard type format to allow you to present. Now, Socius has provided a variety of these types of tools through what they call Socius Analytics. Because this is a cloud-based tool, it is based on a subscription, and Socius is offering these tools for the first 3 months for no cost. Now, you're thinking, well, then I probably get slammed with a big cost. Well, that's not true. The cloud version of Power BI is $9.99 per user per month. So even if you just have a couple users that are mining your data to provide information, this can be quite a value. So what we've looked at is GP requisitions, GP purchase orders, GP purchase order generator. We've looked at ReQlogic, and remember that ReQlogic can do requisitions and it can do invoice approvals. We looked at SmartView and we looked at Power BI. Something else to think about is there are other things that come into play, such as demand planning and vendor contract pricing, and there are tools for that. So if that's something that's more interesting to you, so that you make sure that you have a dynamic way of managing your mins and your maxes, and that you're proactively ordering based on time variables and everything, then we have that functionality to add to the system. And then also, if you have vendors that you have contract pricing with expiration dates and so forth, then you can leverage that as well. So lastly, why did we have this session? We had this session so that we could help you understand that there are ways to help you eliminate redundancy. So if I start with a requisition, I can basically request, I can purchase, and I can invoice with only touching the transaction one time. So it really ends up, and what I mean by that is I don't have to re-enter data all the time. So not only does it eliminate redundancy, but it also improves your data integrity. It, in many ways, is going to help you enhance your data visibility. And one thing that we find probably as important as anything is it eliminates business silos between the different groups within your organization. So you may have a distribution or warehouse team, you have a purchasing team, you have an executive team, and all of those people really need access to this information, and this allows it to be all tied together. And then lastly, this provides you with greater control because the workflow actually is happening through the system and it's secure and people can be limited to what they can do through the process. Then you don't have to worry about things getting lost. You don't have to worry about inconsistencies in your processes and maybe having rogue buyers or people who don't follow your rules, because it really doesn't give you the option of not. So with that, I think, Lindsay, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute, and then if you have any last-minute questions, Lindsay and I will stay around for a couple minutes to answer those.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So a couple of things just to wrap up today. Our next GP webinar will be on October 6th from 1 to 2 Eastern on improve your budgeting process while avoiding Excel pitfalls. And then through, we have 10% off the GP User Group Summit registration, which is October 11th through the 14th in Tampa. And then a couple of promotions that are going on right now. $1,000 off Smart Connect through the end of the month. And then the first 3 months of hosting charges are free through December 16th with K-Commerce. And then 20% off Rockton software through October 31st. And then if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Jeff. His information is there on the screen for you. And then, like he said, we will stick around for a couple additional minutes if there are some last-minute questions. Thank you.